Hello from Vancouver. And hopefully, Brother Doug, I don't know if you can give me like a thumbs up or something, or just that I'm go and everything's working as it should. But hopefully, everybody can hear me. I'm not sure if the camera can be turned on there, Brother James. There we are. I can see you guys now, the back of your heads anyway. Wonderful. Makes me feel a little bit more connected and great to be able to teach from a distance a little bit here tonight and hope everything's working. So, everybody give me a wave if you can hear me. All right, perfect. Fantastic. And hope you guys have had a good day. Hey, if you want a handout, there still should be some handouts. They're available. I'm going to give just a couple announcements before I get started here, but there should be a couple announcements yet right there on that back table, hopefully in one of those slots. And we are on our lesson, getting to the last section of this one. So as we get to the last section, we'll kind of teach through it. We do have our outreach Saturday morning meeting there at the church at 9:30. So I am looking if someone can help. If anyone else is interested in going, I'd love to have one more driver. I've got a couple people want to make sure I have room for everybody. So maybe you've been sitting on the fence as far as coming and you can make this one happen. That would be great. We'd love to have you. Just give me a contact, let me know. And it would be a blessing to make tags there on Saturday. And that'll be a wonderful day. I know they're looking forward to having us come. And sometimes you're doing a lot of the work and a lot of the plowing by yourself. It's a wonderful blessing just to have somebody else to work with you. So we're looking forward to that and looking forward to having a special day with them. So everything went well for me getting here today. Left there this morning out of Toronto, and then I think landed here at about 1 o'clock, 12:30, maybe Vancouver time. And so for me, it's about 4 o'clock, and you all know what that 3 hour time change kind of flips you around. But I'm just pretending that it's 7, and that just makes it easier when you're just here for a day. But thankful I can come. Hopefully, it'll be a blessing. Just to be part of everything that's going on for Pastor Connor here in Vancouver tonight. So visitation this evening, and then the funeral service tomorrow at 11 Vancouver time. If you want to be praying for them, I know they'd appreciate it. All right, I'm going to Esther 8 tonight, Esther 8, and we're going to read a few verses out of this passage. I'm going to try and do things a little bit differently than I did last time. Just because of the delay, I'm going to try and mention some of the questions that will kind of be discussion questions from this lesson. And then Brother Doug already has those questions, and he's going to try and just follow up maybe at the end of the lesson and just get some feedback. So I'll try and give you the question. Maybe that way you can think a little bit about it as we're kind of going through. And then when the discussion questions come up, hopefully we can look at them and think through those together. It's nice for me because I can hear all the service going on even before kind of my teaching opportunity comes. And that way I can be a little bit better connected with what's going on with you there. So Esther chapter 8 is where I am. I'm going to read a few verses here from the beginning of this chapter, and then just take a minute to pray, ask God to help us as we look at this lesson tonight. And I'm excited to share a few truths from this passage with you and trust to be encouragement as we look at it together, okay? Esther 8, verse 1. On that day did the king Ahasuerus give the house of Haman, the Jews' enemy, unto Esther the queen. And Mordecai came before the king, for Esther had told what he was unto her. And the king took off his ring, which he had taken from Haman, and gave it unto Mordecai. And Esther set Mordecai over the house of Haman. And Esther spake yet again before the king, and fell down at his feet, and besought him with tears to put away the mischief of Haman the Agagite, and his device that he had devised against the Jews. Then the king held out the golden scepter toward Esther. So Esther arose and stood before the king and said, if it please the king, and if I have found favor in his sight, and the thing seem right before the king, and I be pleasing in his eyes, let it be written to reverse the letters devised by Haman, the son of Hammedatha the Agagite, which he wrote to destroy the Jews which are in all the king's provinces. For how can I endure to see the evil that shall come unto my people? Or how can I endure to see the destruction of my kindred? Then the king Ahasuerus said unto Esther the queen and to Mordecai the Jew, behold, I have given Esther the house of Haman, and him they have hanged upon the gallows, because he laid his hand upon the Jews. Write you also for the Jews, as it liketh you, in the king's name, and seal it with the king's ring. For the writing which is written in the king's name and is sealed with the king's ring may no man reverse. Let's just pause there. We'll pray. Ask God to help us as we look at this lesson together. God, thank you so much for your great mercy to us. I do pray that you'd help us tonight as we look at this passage. I pray that you'd equip us, encourage us, and teach us. Help every person that we'd get some truth tonight that would help us to get to know you better. Thank you so much for this time, we pray in Jesus' name. Amen. All right, we've been looking at this passage and trying to learn some truths, I hope, from it. That'll be a help to you and an encouragement as we've been looking through this lesson. As we've talked a little bit, we're kind of hitting the biggest climax of the story, and really everything has come to a head. Haman and his heinous activity has kind of been brought to light. Ahasuerus and his great frustration and anger out of what Haman had kind of done out of self interest and selfishness, and really because of his own prideful desire to see himself exalted. Eventually, Ahasuerus finds that out, deals with Haman. Haman has just been killed. He's just been hung on the gallows. All of this seems to be happening so quickly. Really, even in those first 3 verses that we read here in Esther chapter 8, it just seems like the whole story is inverted. Everything that has been going one direction switches and starts going the other direction. And so, really, in the middle of this, you see so much transition, so much change that is happening. And really, it's kind of showing how much God can change a situation in a very short period of time. And so, we're kind of hitting the end of this lesson that has kind of been, in my opinion, the climax of this story. We've looked at a couple other things. If you have that handout, we've talked about the request of Esther. We talked about how well she did of balancing that challenge of both, on one hand, being clear about what needed to be done, but also very carefully and in great humility dealing with a very complicated situation with the king. And we kind of examined how she dealt with that request, and just kind of thinking through for ourselves when the day comes that we have to deal with complicated situations, to deal with it with truth and with grace. And those two things, properly combined in the right time and the right way. And then we talked about the revelation of Haman. That was last week. We talked about, hey, it seems sometimes that evil men get away with things for a long time, but eventually the truth comes out. And that can be frustrating for us when we're in that process. We sometimes want to see someone doing wrong. As soon as they do wrong the first time, we want to see it come to light. But sometimes there's a long runway between when someone starts doing the wrong thing and when eventually that thing becomes apparent. And so this has all been part of the finale of the story. And that's kind of what has brought us here to the end, kind of where God is bringing here. And that's number 3, the relief for the Jews. The relief for the Jews. Now, I want you to look through this story, and I want you to understand this principle. And this is really what we're going to try and get across tonight. Sometimes when things have been done that have been really bad or really wrong, sometimes there's no easy undo button. And maybe, I'm sure that'll be one of our questions. I think that's the first one we're looking at. Some of the things sometimes that happen in our life that sometimes don't have an easy undo button. You ever wished that you could press the undo button or have a redo button maybe on your day? Maybe something came out of your mouth that you wish you wouldn't have. Maybe you did something that you wish you wouldn't have done. And sometimes things, when they go really wrong or don't go the way that they should have gone, sometimes it's not easy to put things back together again. Now, I'm trying to bring out that truth because here is Haman that has done something really wicked. He has announced today at which everyone can massacre the Jewish people. And because of the way the legal system works underneath the king, once something has been put in motion, it cannot be reversed. And this is a real part of the complexity of this passage, because here is something that Esther desperately wants changed, but the law will not allow it to be undone. But that's a lot like life. And there's many different instances in which we deal with situations that, hey, we can't just take back the words that we said. We can't necessarily stop the hurt that's been caused. Sometimes there's someone that that's been through something really heinous or really difficult, and you can't just necessarily wave a magic wand and make it all go away. And sometimes in life, we do deal with second best scenarios. It's an imperfect situation. We're going to do our best to make good out of something that has been going really, really bad. And sometimes that can just be a really, really complicated process. And so here, how did the relief for the Jews come about? And that's really the point of the lesson. Did God just bring out a big magic eraser and say, hey, we're going to go back, 3 months and we're going to relive this again? How is God going to bring relief? How is God going to bring resolution? How is God going to fix something that has been going so, so bad? Because a lot of life in the same way is not necessarily always can we have a picture perfect story when sometimes things have gone really, really wrong. And trying to get God's wisdom and God's course to make the best out of an imperfect situation is something that every one of us need. And so let's look at a few things from this lesson. The first thing I want you to see there in your notes is letter A is Mordecai's destiny. Mordecai's destiny. Okay. Big turnaround in the life of Mordecai. And you can see this here in Esther 8, verses 1 and 2. It says, on that day did the king Ahasuerus give the house of Haman, the Jews' enemy, unto Esther, the queen. So all of Haman's property, all of Haman's wealth, all of his possessions are put underneath the leadership and given over to Esther. Whatever you want to do with it, Esther, it's yours. This man has been doing wrong to you and your people, so everything that has been his is immediately going to become yours. And what else goes on? And Mordecai came before the king. So all of this is happening, it seems, in a very short period of time. Almost, it looks like at the beginning of the verse that it could have been the same day. Same day, all these things are unfolding. Same day, maybe Mordecai came before the king. And it says here that Esther had told him what he was unto her. So here Esther is revealed, hey, this is, my uncle. This is someone that is a relative of mine. And, this is the situation. And so immediately Mordecai is going from being someone that Haman wanted killed to you're seeing an immediate advancement of Mordecai. And it's a situation that, had some bumps along the way, but here everything is changing for Mordecai. He's going from being just escaping the gallows to being someone that is going to be, as you'll see, second in command under the king. Look at verse 2. And the king took off his ring, which he had taken from Haman, and gave it unto Mordecai. And Esther set Mordecai over the house of Haman. Seems to be some incredible kind of poetic justice here that is going on. But all of Haman's things are given to Mordecai. Haman's position is given to Mordecai. Everything seems to be turned around. But here, pause here just for a minute and think through this with me. Because in our mind, it would have been wonderful if Mordecai would have been second in command a long time ago. It would have been great if Mordecai would have passed by all of the difficulties and challenges, if he would have been the one that would have been properly promoted instead of Haman, this wicked man, being promoted so long before. And sometimes we have these situations in which the wrong person gets promoted, the wrong person, is given what they should not be given. But here is Mordecai in this situation that he's advanced, but maybe in his eyes, he could have been like, well, it would have been great if it would have been before Haman did all the things to our people. But hey, this is what the Bible's painting. It's an imperfect situation. Things did not necessarily go exactly how Mordecai or Esther may would have wanted them to go, but God is weaving his story and he is making this situation work out properly. It's good for us to recognize, because although Mordecai may have wanted things different, the Bible doesn't tell us. But what's beautiful is to see that here in this situation, God worked things out in such a way that what is emphasized is not Mordecai's death or his struggle, but what he is given in promotion. The end of the story is what God wants us to notice. That here Mordecai is the one that is given both the wealth and the position and the prosperity of what Haman had to begin with. Everything turns around. I want to look at a couple of those things, because I want you to notice by the time the end of the story comes around, you may have in your notes, but Second Corinthians 4 verses 17 and 18. You know, when God does turn things around and when the end of the story is the way that we wish it would have been, those things end up making such a difference and bringing to us personal peace that there can be joy even though things have been difficult. So hopefully we'll see this as we look at the passage. But 2 Corinthians 4, verses 17 and 18. For our light affliction, which is but for a moment, worketh for us a far more exceeding and eternal weight of glory. For we look not at the things which are seen, but the things which are not seen. For the things which are seen are temporal, but the things which are not seen are eternal. Romans 8 and verse 18 is another one I'm going to read. For I reckon that the sufferings of this present time are not worthy to be compared with the glory which shall be revealed in us. So, what's the point? Why we're bringing these verses together? You know, by the time Mordecai got to the end of his story, the sufferings that he had gone through before were not the point. What God did in the end was the point. It seems like everything else is forgotten because the end of the story was perfectly how God designed it to be. And there's a similarity here that the lesson is drawing and trying to help us realize that, hey, we go through a lot of things in life sometimes that we feel like are imperfect, that sometimes we feel like are not the way they should have gone, that sometimes the way our story is written is frustrating. And why is this going the way it is? And why am I struggling through this? And why do evil people do evil things to me? And why am I going through all these things? But the point that is trying to be made is by the time we get to the end of the end of the story is what matters. And as a child of God, I think it's good for us to consider, you know, although life may frustrate us in moments now, one day when we get to the end of the story, when we're in glory with the Lord, when earthly frustrations are not our daily life, but living with God in eternity is our experience, all those things that happened in the beginning of our story are not going to matter anymore. And that's going to be our second question with the time that we have tonight. Once Brother Doug is able to kind of go through some of these questions with you, what are some things that you think sometimes frustrate us a lot now? In some ways, that may have been difficult for Mordecai when he was going through it, but are just the past of our story. Once, hey, when we get to heaven and once God has promoted us, for lack of better words, to heaven with him, all those other things, what are some of the things that just aren't going to matter anymore? I think it's good for us to consider that because sometimes when we're in the middle of the story, all of those little details get frustrating. But God is able to bring things about. God is able to bring resolution. God is able to bring, of course, his glory and his blessing. And it's a great reminder here, too, as you look at the story that, hey, you know, Mordecai's timing of promotion, when God brought this about, God could have done it very much early in the story, but God had a purpose in every single step along this way to weave together his story to make this happen. And it's important that Christians don't seek promotion. And I think there's a good verse here, Psalm 75, 6 and 7. You may have there in your notes. For promotion cometh neither from the east, nor from the west, nor from the south. But God is the judge. He putteth down one and setteth up another. Right? We could have looked through human lens and we could have said, hey, this would have been so much easier if Mordecai was second in command from the very beginning. But God brought about his both rising and promotion according to his plan. And God made it all work. Although we'd look at it and we say, hey, this isn't perfect. This isn't the way it should have gone. This is kind of a mess at certain moments. But no, God is working this all out. And I would just encourage you as a side note, I think in our human flesh, there's times where we want and we look at people that are maybe like Haman, that are wicked and that are evil, that are taking leadership are like, why wasn't I asked? Why don't I get those opportunities? And sometimes we tend to start playing by the world's rules to be able to get what we want in leadership and promotion. Just wait on the Lord for that. God brings things about and God weaves together his story in his timing. I love the quote that was part of our notes. I'll read it for you in case you don't have it in front of you, but it said, God will provide promotions if they are necessary to do his work. That means God doesn't necessarily just give us promotions for our own personal selfish benefit. But notice what John G. Butler says. He says this: you do not need to pull strings, know the right people, bribe the powers that be, or manipulate people to obtain high position. If you need promotion to do God's work, God will see to it that you get it, and you will obtain it in an honorable way. Isn't that a neat part of the story? That he, the very end of this is Mordecai getting promotion, but getting promotion by having character, by loving God, and by doing right. And wow, is it ever so much better, although the story may look imperfect, that hey, if you're ever given a position of promotion, that hey, you did it honorably, you did it righteously, you did it purely. Because the world's way, although it wins short term, I think you'll see often in life, it does not win long term. And the end game of the story, just like it was for Mordecai, the end of the story is what is important. And for the Christian, we're not looking even right now just at the things that are seen, but as that verse reminded us, the things that are not seen. Our hope is in heaven. And so we don't want to focus all of our attention on just the promotion that comes here, that comes and that it goes. And sometimes we get frustrated. That's going to be number three as far as questions. It says we're often tempted to act prematurely instead of letting God deal with the situation. Sometimes we use that expression, jump the gun, instead of waiting on God's timing. And the question is this: what are some natural consequences that may happen when we rush a situation? Look, if we jump God's timing, God worked this out with Mordecai, with Esther, with Haman, with everything that was happening, but everything was done in the right timing. What sometimes happens when and that'll be the question we'll look at here in a few minutes, what are some things that might happen if we jump the gun, if we push God's timing outside of what God intended? All right, so here the next one. We talk about Mordecai's destiny. All right, it did not seem perfect, but God worked it out. This situation that it seemed like, hey, at the very beginning, here is Ahasuerus. His authority has been used to bring about the destruction of the Jewish people. It's been signed, sealed, and delivered. How are we going to undo this mess? How are we going to fix what seems to be such a broken situation? And so we first dealt with Mordecai. All right, we dealt with how his messy situation was untangled. But B, what we're going to really look at is the Jews' deliverance, because this is the main problem. Here are the Jewish people that are supposed to be killed. All right, they're supposed to die. A day has been set aside. Haman has used the king's authority to make a law to put this in such a way that you see this expression happen a few times in the book of Esther, that it can't be changed. It is the law of the Medes and the Persians, and how the Bible words it, that cannot be undone. And so, how are we going to fix this? And I'm trying to remind you, that's what life is like sometimes. Sometimes there's not a redo button. Sometimes we need God's wisdom to navigate sometimes situations where people didn't do the right thing the right way. And how do we navigate through this mess? And so, what's going to happen here with the Jews' deliverance? And you see this in Esther 8, verse number 3. And I find this interesting because then Esther spake yet again before the king and fell down at his feet and besought him with tears to put away the mischief of Haman the Agagite and his device that he had devised against the Jews. Now, this is interesting to me because the king already knows what's happening. The king knows the law that has been signed, but it seems no immediate action is taken by the king to fix this. Now, I think that must have been a little bit hard for Esther. What's the situation? What is the king going to do? And sometimes leaders, even when they know what needs to be sometimes to be done, sometimes leaders, for whatever reason, don't always move on what needs to be done. And that could put people like Esther in a difficult situation. And that's going to be one of the questions here as well. It said, even though the king had authorized a judgment on Haman, Esther still had to go back to beg for the lives of her people. And that's kind of the question. Are there any situations where we might need to go back and remind a leader of next steps? What are some bad ways to handle that situation? So here is Esther has to kind of move things along because Ahasuerus doesn't seem to be taking any immediate action. She comes back into the king's courtroom, and the Bible says falls down at his feet and is crying to, hey, king, can you fix this? Can you do something about this? because either through ignorance or through inactivity, the king hasn't yet done anything to fix the situation. And so here Esther is begging. Look at verse number 6. For how can I endure to see the evil that shall come upon my people? Or how can I endure to see the destruction of my kindred? The king had made this irrevocable, or at least under his authority, an irrevocable decree. And so how are we going to fix this situation? What's going to happen? And Esther is begging for a solution. I want you to see the first thing should be in your notes. The king gives freedom to the Jews. This is how the king responds. Again, the king is not able, nor does he, wave a magic wand and just take away what has been done, right? And that's life sometimes. Sometimes things have happened in the past, and that's always a challenging thing. How do you, as a Christian, if you're trying to help someone else who's made some bad life decisions, how do you help them to make the best decisions they can today? Sometimes other people, like the Jewish people here, someone else has done something really bad to them, and they can't have necessarily a perfect blank slate of a life at this point, but they need God's wisdom to take the best next steps that they can now. And the Jewish people are kind of in that situation, this situation where, hey, this law has been written. So what do we do now? We can't back it up. We can't redo it. How do we fix this? So the king gives freedom to the Jews. Verse 7 of Esther 8. Then the king Ahasuerus said unto Esther the queen and to Mordecai the Jew, Behold, I have given Esther the house of Haman, and him have they hanged upon the gallows, because he laid his hands upon the Jews. Write ye also for the Jews as it liketh you in the king's name, and seal it with the king's ring. For the writing which is written in the king's name and seal with the king's ring, man may no man reverse. Now, here the king knows there's no easy fix, but what he does do, he says, hey, if you want to fix, I am giving you the authority and the freedom to do whatever you would like to fix the situation. That's a huge blessing. Mordecai is able, as a Jewish man, to be able to be given the authority, the authorization as second in command to the king at this point, to be able to go and do whatever he can to make sure that the Jewish people are protected. It's a huge blessing, but it's something that basically the king gives him a blank slate. And you see there the second thing there in your notes, the king allows the Jews to defend themselves. And this is really what Mordecai decides as he's going through. Look, we can't undo the past. We can't change what Haman has done. But what we can do is make the best out of a very imperfect situation. And the best that you'll see there, Esther 8, verses 9 through 14, it says, Then were the king's scribes called at that time in the third month, that is the Melsiban, on the third and 20th day thereof, and it was written according to all that Mordecai commanded unto the Jews, and to the lieutenants and the deputies and rulers of the provinces that were from India unto Ethiopia, 127 provinces, unto every province according to the writing thereof, and to every people after their language, and the Jews according to their writing and according to the language. So whatever command is going out here, what the Bible is trying to emphasize is that every language, every province. I remember at the beginning of this book, we kind of went through how big this empire is, how monstrous Ahasuerus' reign is, that Judah is just one of these 127 provinces. So what Mordecai is doing is using this authority to be able to make this announcement, not just to the close proximity of the king, but to every province underneath Ahasuerus' rule. And so this is being sent out. Everybody knows what is going on. This is being done, it says, with great authority, with great speed. Verse 10, and he wrote in King Ahasuerus' name and sealed it with the king's ring and sent letters by posts on horseback and riders on mules, camels, and young dromedaries, wherein the king granted the Jews. And this is the solution. All right. Now, this is not a perfect solution. And I look at this and I'm like, man, I don't know if I'd even want necessarily to be involved in this solution. It'd be challenging. It'd still be scary. But verse 11, wherein the king granted the Jews, which were in every city, to gather themselves together and to stand for their life, to destroy, to slay, and to cause to perish all the power of the people and province that would assault them, both little ones and women, and to take the spoil of them for prey. upon one day in all the provinces of King Ahasuerus, namely upon the 13th day of the 12th month, which is the month Adar. Now remember, Haman had set aside a day at which people could kill all the Jews, basically kill all the Jews and take their stuff. And so that gave a lot of motivation for people that already hated the Jews to take Haman's ability to be able to do that. The rule can't be reversed, but what the king allows Mordecai under his authority to do is say, you know what, wherever the Jewish people are, they can assemble, they can weaponize themselves, they can protect themselves, they can work as groups together, that if someone does attack them, I'm giving them legal authority to defend themselves and to make sure if someone is trying to kill them, that they have legal authority. There'll be no reprisal. If when someone is trying to kill them, that they defend themselves and kill someone else. And so it balanced the scales. It allowed this situation to be such as that, hey, people didn't want to just necessarily attack a large group of people like the Jewish people that had gathered together to protect themselves. And it really helped a very complicated situation to have a best course out as far as dealing with this situation. And I think this is going to be one of the questions I just want you guys to cover after I kind of stop teaching here in a minute. That's number 5 I have. Sometimes fixing a situation has less than ideal solutions, is what that word is supposed to be, really, Doug. But why do you think people struggle in situations that they have to make an imperfect decision? What do I mean by that? I mean, sometimes people look at a situation like this and we just go, well, the solution that I want is not the solution that I can have. This is the solution that I want. You know, I want this person to change. I want this person fired. I want, this person to start treating me right. And sometimes the solution that we want is not the solution that we can get. And sometimes we have to, with God's wisdom, plot a course through it to try and make the best of a very imperfect situation. And that's really what happened to the Jewish people. And we need God's wisdom in the same way to do the same thing. And what really makes this story special here towards the end, if we can go there together, letter C, just for sake of time, I need to wrap things up here. Letter C is the Jews' delight. The Jews' delight. Now, I want you to see that, okay? Because the Jewish people did not respond to this with like, oh man, it would have been so much better if this just would have never happened to begin with. I mean, all of them are on the brink of extinction. They know that there's a huge possibility that they could be killed and destroyed. And so when Mordecai walks out here, verse 15, it says, and Mordecai went out from the presence of the king in royal apparel of blue and white. Now that's in comparison to the sackcloth that Mordecai has been wearing for a long time. Okay. He comes out now with royal apparel on, a symbol of both authority and a symbol of no more mourning, with a great crown of gold and with a garment of fine linen and purple. And the city of Shushan rejoiced and was glad. Notice this, the Jews had light and gladness and joy and honor. And in every province and in every city, whether sort of the king's commandment and his decree came, the Jews had joy and gladness, a feast. And I like this wording in the Bible, and a good day, right? Just a good day. And this is the truth of life, right? We all hit situations as to which there is no necessarily perfect solution. If I was the Jewish people in this scenario, I'd been like, can't the king just make an exception? Can't we just change the law? Can't we just change the rule? I mean, where is the big law magic eraser? Haman did wrong. It never should have happened. Can't we take this to a court of appeals? I mean, can't something be done? But the simple reality was in the story, from how the Bible lays it out, there was no redo. There was no undo. It was plotting a course through a complicated, imperfect situation. But in the midst of that, Mordecai is promoted. We might have thought it would have been better earlier, but the truth is God used it at exactly the right time to accomplish his purpose. We might have thought it would have been better for the Jews to never have to struggle underneath the fear of death, but God worked it out so they could protect themselves. And the response of the people is not oh man, this is second best. I wish my life would have gone a different way. They are just thrilled that God works it out. And that really is the emphasis of the story. They're thrilled that God gave them a way out of an incredibly difficult and complicated situation. And I want to give you this thought, and hopefully it'll help all of us tonight to consider. It is very damaging as a Christian when we spend our life pining and being frustrated out of what could have been a better solution if we could have just had a redo button. I think we've all done that sometimes. Oh, if it just would have gone this way, this wouldn't have happened. Oh, if it just would have gone this way, I wouldn't have had to deal with that. But there is a real lesson here that, hey, when God works things out, when there is a way through, even when to us it seems imperfect, the appropriate and right response is to have joy and gladness and recognize any day for the Jewish people that we don't end up dying is a good day. And sometimes we set the bar and we get frustrated because we're like, well, this is the way it should have gone. I wish I would have never gone through that. And I wish, my life would have been different. And I wish I wouldn't have had this struggle, or I wish I wouldn't have had this problem. And I understand life is imperfect. I wouldn't have wanted to be a Jewish person through this story. That would have been heart wrenching, scary, difficult, frustrating. But God is not looking at this story like it was a mistake. God is looking at this story as a story of victory, the story that God, through a very complicated, awkward, terrorizing situation, that God brought something beautiful and something perfect and something wonderful, even though the situation was far from perfect. And it's a wonderful lesson. And look at the end of the story here in Esther chapter 8 and verse 17. It says, and many of the people of the land became Jews, for the fear of the Jews fell upon them. Now, what the Bible is telling us is people watch this story unfold. They see everything that happens. People that are not followers of God, they see everything that happens to the Jewish people. And they start looking at it and say, hey, there is something in this situation that is just not regular, that is miraculous, that is not natural. And people start converting to the Jewish faith. They start following the Lord. They start recognizing there is a need for a holy respect because of everything that God has done. They see everything that God does in these people's lives, and it causes a change within the heart of the people where the Jewish people are dwelling. I think it's a great reminder for us because we never know that although we navigate imperfect situations, that our life has twists and turns that we wish we could maybe have a redo button on, or wish could have gone differently, or I wish that person would have not hurt me, or maybe even sometimes we wish I never would have met that person or dealt with that person. We sometimes have those feelings, but as we go through those situations, we never know how God can use those and who might be watching that God can use to impact the gospel witness that maybe you could have. And so let me encourage you as you navigate sometimes imperfect situations, as sometimes we look down and we say, look, I don't know what to do. I know I've had times where people come to me with a situation that they're going through, and sometimes because of decisions they've made or decisions that someone else has made that is impacting them. And I'll be honest, sometimes like, man, how do you deal with this situation? How do you navigate out of this? But you do your very best to apply God's principles in a complicated situation. You see God bring you through it. And then there is that moment of joy and gladness at saying, look at what God did even when this looks so messed up. And God can use your life as you respond right in difficult situations. As people watch, it can be an incredible witness of all that God can do. And that's really what this story is about. More than anything, this story is not about what Esther did. The story is not about what Mordecai did. The story is about what God did to protect his people. And if we'll just step aside sometimes and let people see what God can do in complicated situations, as we keep our spirit right and our attitude right, we can see some wonderful things of what God can do.